Hey, this is Chin Teik, founder and president of Chin Teik Consulting. If you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Dennis Giannuzzo.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannuzzo.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. The purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then it can inspire real change. It is now time to adapt in our fast-moving world. And listeners, hey, welcome to the show today, and I really want to welcome you. And I have a wonderful guest with me. His name is Chin Teik, and he is based in Hong Kong. And he is an experienced senior executive coach and process consultant, working with founders, C-suite, senior executives, and teams using system solution to enable them to execute to greatness, including framing an organization's constancy of purpose. And I'm sure he will actually share us a little bit more about that later on. He's renowned for his dynamic and intuitive coaching and consulting style and process. And he's got a broad exposure in manufacturing, sales and marketing, training and development, HRD and shared services in the regional and global leadership roles, reinforcing the value proposition he brings to any assignment. He's played a key role in opening up new markets in Asia Pacific, China and India to extend brand and growth and add to his startup perspective, experience and exposure. He's authored some workbooks as well, Greatness Workbook series, some practical toolkits, and that complement his action learning workshops, including his one-page article and also podcasts and video clips. Chin Teik, welcome to our show.
Dennis, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you here. Thank you. And I've given a brief background on you. Anything else you might want to add?
No, pretty good for now. Thank you so much.
Pretty good. Hey, so how did you get into leadership?
How I got into leadership? Accidental. All of us are accidental in terms of our life roles. I believe that 90% of our life roles were all accidental, like husbands, wives, brothers, sons, and more so than anything else, management and leadership. Individual contributors are basically promoted because of their contribution at the current state, not necessary for the character, not necessary for their leadership styles, not necessary for all the broader qualities. And worse is that they don't get trained.
Wow, yeah. Tell us more about that.
So I'll tell you my story. Basically, I was a fresh graduate from a local university in Penang. And basically, my first job was Intel. And I didn't know at that point, without a lot of counseling and a lot of exposure, that Intel is a semiconductor company. I thought it was a chip factory, potato chips, right? Knew nothing, walked inside, got my first job. And I joined as a production superintendent because they wanted to experiment with fresh graduates. So imagine a 22-year-old walking inside there with peers older than he is. I have no work experience, and all my peers rank from file, right?
Yep.
So nothing prepared me. My university degree did not prepare me to be a production superintendent.
Wow.
Another painful experience was within 6 months of that role, I was thrown into a room and was told to tell 30 female operators that they've been retrenched. No script, no training, nothing.
Good
right?
luck.
So
go ahead and do that.
Yeah, during the early days for Intel, I mean, right now it's gone over and been very sophisticated. But during the early days, when I joined in 1978, there were no integration, no training, no development. You're basically thrown in the deep end. If you can swim and survive,
awesome.
You're pretty good.
But most people in your experience, did they actually swim and survive, or did they struggle?
Well, I'll give you an example. There were two of us fresh grads going inside as pilot, right? Out of the two of us, one survived. That's me.
Yeah,
right?
And that's because you like potato chips, right?
That's one. But fundamentally, I believe that a lot of who I am and what I am has come from my past.
Right.
Right. And a lot of my leadership, unconsciously, now that I look back, came from my teens. 7 years of my teens was very much by equipping. I'm thankful to a late mentor of mine. He passed away in 2019. But this person, Dennis, out of a school of 1,000 high school students, he just picked me up, looked at me and said, "You're going to join the Scouts."
Wow.
And I go like, "I'm not ready," because, we were about to go into a very, very critical examination for that period. And I said, probably a year later. He waited a year, Dennis. He came back, sought me out, looked at me again and said, "Are you ready now?"
Wow.
And because of this man, number one is that he exposed me to scouting. And through scouting, now that I look back, I have the foundations for leadership, role accountability, grit and hardiness, high-performing team,
Yep.
discipline, right? And at that point, I didn't know. I mean, at the point, I was enjoying myself. I was going through training camps, doing all kind of stuff, right? But when I got older into my role, I realized that leadership is not something you train someone when they're 35 years old or 50 years old. It's really hard, right? So if you don't have the platform for it, it's harder to build it up, right? And so I'm very thankful for this man. I'm very thankful for God for what God has placed into my life. And I believe when I look back, I mean, there are so many people in my life, Dennis, who shaped me at the right time, at the right place, and helped shift me.
Right. So they both not only shaped you, but they also shifted you as well.
Yes. My three words are fundamentally, number one is, there's an element of caught. A lot of things you catch, right? Because you're watching them, right? I mean, like this mentor of mine, he didn't really sit me down, Dennis, like in a training workshop and say, "I'm going to teach you this," right? He basically role model. I mean, he gave me unconditional Christian love. He picked me up. He took care of me. He threw me in the deep end, but he was there to support me. He walked the talk, right? And through that, there was a catching portion on my part. That means I catch it, and there's a shaping part, and there is a nurturing part. So nurtured, caught, shaped.
Yep, cool. Very good. And I think that's also, based on what you just said, from that helped you with your foundation, that platform.
Yes.
And from there, you're able to build on that as well and take you to do things.
Yes.
Brilliant. And I think Scouts, as an organization and other things like that, allow us to, as leaders, develop and teach us some beautiful life skills and leadership skills that is transferable, right?
Amen. Amen to that. I mean, today when you think about that, there's a lot of team building activities, right, that people pay for. Basic things I enjoy it for free.
Yeah.
Right, all this outdoorsy stuff and all that, right? I mean, we did it for free, and I'm sure you heard of someone like Bear Grylls. I mean, what he did is basically what Scouts do, and he's an ambassador for Scouts.
Yep. Great guy. Who's your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history. So, who's your favorite leader and why?
I don't have anyone per se, but I see these people as people who have shaped my life. I have a few of them. I've just spoke about this mentor of mine. I mean, he was a big deal in my life. The other one also is the late founder of Intel, Andy Grove. He was one of the three founders. And one thing that I worked and saw from him is fundamentally transparency, brutal, honest truth. Brutal, honest truth is really hard in this world today, Dennis. Not a lot of people are very willing to call out the brutal, honest truth. But one of the things he taught us in the culture of Intel is that the more layers you have, the more your brutal, honest truth does not come up to the top leadership. It's kind of hidden in the layers, right?
And he's got a book. He's got a book out as well, right? Andrew Grove. It's High Output Management. I think it's called.
It's a great book. If you have not read it, I strongly recommend it. He has a high output management book. He also has another one called The Only Paranoid Survive.
Right.
So he's really big on paranoia. One of the things he always challenged us that I learned is never be complacent.
Yep.
So as a leader manager, when I was growing up and when I shifted into a much more conscious leader manager, one of the things I learned from him was to always stretch my people.
Yes.
Right.
Great.
So for example, in year one, if we accomplish X goal, right? In year two, I have to think about how to stretch them. I don't just stay on the year one goal throughout for the next 5 years.
Because the bar you need to raise the bar, right? Because we've done that now. Yeah.
Correct. Because if we don't keep raising the bar, we become irrelevant.
Yep.
And if we don't keep raising the bar, we don't stretch that muscle, right? I mean, you spoke about change and transformation. And one of the things that I think that I would akin it to working out at the gym is that muscle memory, is working that muscle.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think organizations have become, in my mind, forgive the French, quite wimpish, is that we're not stretching our people, Dennis.
Yep.
We're too nice in many instances. And one of the things I learned from the late Andy Grove was be tough, but be fair.
Yep. Nice. Beautiful. Be tough, but be fair.
Be tough, but be fair. And I'm also thankful for a lot of my previous bosses or leaders, if you will. One of them taught me about stakeholder management.
Yes.
All right. He taught me how to keep score. Like, for example, if you go into, like, for example, Dennis, if you're my boss, and I will keep score of how many times when I go in to see you for a proposal, how many times you kick me out of the room. Right? So I keep a score and I keep scoring myself. And every time I come out, if I didn't get through to you, I have to sit down and assess and say, why didn't I get it through you, right?
Yep.
But in many instances in today's life, most people just blame the boss. Like, I'll say, Dennis, you're not a good boss because you're not listening to me, right? But what I've learned from that mentor of mine and previous boss of mine is look at yourself. Don't blame the boss. Ask yourself, what didn't you do right?
Beautiful.
What could you do better?
Yes.
Right. And so I learned from that. So I kept keeping score of every time I go in. And then incidentally, I have another mentor of mine, or so-called the worldwide CMB director, and he taught me the power of no. That is,
yes,
the power of
huge.
No, right?
Yep.
And what he taught me was this, because everyone told me that this guy is just hard to get a yes from, right? And by the time I got to work with him, and I designed a way for him to say yes to me, because I'll give you a quick story, right? When we went to China in 1991, we wanted to open up China. And in 1991, nobody knew about China. Nobody in the global world knew how tough China is, right? Mm-hmm. When I was in China in 1991, everything was in Chinese. There was no English, okay? Today is very different, right? But at that point, nobody knew what it was like in China and what hardship is, right? And so I had to go get this expat policy bought off by this big guy who uses the power of no. And he refused to come to China. He refused to look at my expat policy. So I had to go above him, which pissed him off, go above him, through his boss, got him here. But it was through the time we spent together for 2 weeks and him being in China, going through the hardship of traffic jams, going through the hardship of flying in a French Fokker, in an old Russian Fokker plane with no seatbelt, he signed off my expat policy.
Wow. Amazing. So you got to experience, right?
The only way you're going to experience market, if truly about globalization, Dennis, as a sidebar, if you truly want to be global, you have to be out in those markets. You cannot be global sitting where you're at.
No, you have to go out and have that experience for sure. Yep.
Correct.
And it's not just being in a room with a group of leaders either. It's actually afterwards in the restaurant, in the traffic jams, in the lobbies, the hotels. That's where you do definitely learn. But going back to the power of no, I think that's great. And I think a lot of leaders that I talk to as well is that them understanding how they can say no in a constructive way, because a lot of leaders today, they just want to say yes, yes, yes to please everybody, but then they get overwhelmed because they're just taking too much on.
Yeah. I think the other side of power of no too, Dennis, is that I want to see how much you believe in your proposal. I want to see you as my staff, how much you believe in your proposal, right? So for example, if you came to me once and I said no, or you went away and never came back, that's not enough passion. That's not enough belief, right?
Yep.
But if you pause, you came back once or twice, or you're even willing to come back and say, boss, why didn't you say yes to me? What am I missing? That, I think, shows character.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. Now, the show is called Leadership is Changing.
Yes.
when I say that statement, what does that mean for you?
Leadership is synonymous with change.
Mm-hmm.
Management is status quo.
Right.
So I believe that in today's world, a lot of so-called leaders are actually managers. They're not leaders.
Right.
They're managing status quo. They're doing business as usual. If you're a true leader, to me, it is linked to change. And change comes from basically a gap. The gap is the difference between my dissatisfaction and unhappiness with the current state and my ability to see the future state. And when that difference is seen and that gap is there, then I need to step up as a leader to lead the change or to lead the transformation.
Yep. And do something about that, right? And to close the gap.
Absolutely, and to close the gap. And what I teach a lot of my clients, or when I was working in the corporate world, is that anytime there's a gap between your current and your target, you've got to do something different, Dennis.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I mean, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. And what I see a lot of people do, Dennis, is that they have a gap in the between the currency and target, and they keep doing the same thing.
It's crazy.
So if you don't change, that's why my system solution idea is there, right? If you don't change the process, the system, the capability, or even yourself, how do you close the gap?
Yep. Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. That's very good. Yeah. And so, understanding listeners where you are, where you want to go to the future plan, but then also understand there's a gap and then leading that change to help close that gap is really important for you. Chin Teik, if I turn around and ask you here, how has your business or industry changed and how has that affected you?
Good question. I am not as, well, I'll come from two segments. Number one is my clients are in pain. My clients are in pain because number one is that they are a business. I mean, they have lots of people working for them, and there's a responsibility to the staff, and they have to look at livelihoods and they have to look at how they keep the business running.
Yep.
Right. I'm basically a sole proprietor, so I'm by myself. This is actually my second career, so I'm basically able to get through it in a sense that, God willing, and God's been very kind. Even in this period, Dennis, I've got new contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So because of who I am, because of my business, I'm still able to do coaching and consulting. I've heard about your situation as well. You just ran a workshop. So we're able to do that because we're kind of sole proprietor. We're able to pivot. But, I feel empathy for the businesses that have, people working for them. In fact, right now I'm working with one client whose business is a travel industry.
Wow.
And they are really hit. Yep. I mean, we're talking about survival, Dennis.
It's huge. So the travel industry is just huge. I mean, it's
huge,
really, yeah.
Right. And so I'm working them through crisis management. I'm working them through change and transition. The other thing also is in the previous discussion we had about leadership stepping up to lead change. One very key area to think about is this for the audience, right? Change management is kind of easy in the sense that you stand up one day and say, I want to change the organization. And so it's done. So change principle is done unto you without your permission. Just as COVID-19 has done unto us without any of our permission. It's sudden, it happens, right? And what's key for me that I work with my clients is not just change management and not just transformation, but the transition.
Yes, huge.
The emotional transition of 3 stages. Stage 1 is called letting go. Stage 2 is called neutral zone. Stage 3 is called new beginning, right? And what most people don't realize is that when they implement something, they're not working people to move through those 3 stages, Dennis. And so everybody's stuck in the letting go stage, right? They're not happy with the new idea, the new state. They're kind of comfortable with the current state. And so they're not shifting. And about 95% of leaders and managers I work with have no clue about emotional transition and how to work through that.
Yeah, because most people don't want to change. They're happy as they are, as you're saying, right? I don't want to change. I mean,
there you go.
Do change to others, and I'm happy to help others do change. But for me, I don't want to do change.
Right. And I think that there are a few key teachable points I want to just share here, right? Number one is that I had gone through personal transition and transformation, right? And when you think about a lot of businesses today, there are many, many managers in the organizations that have never gone through crisis.
Right.
that has never gone through personal change and transformation. So when you don't have the experience and exposure and the education, which is your paradigm, then you're stuck. That's why one of my terms I say, Dennis, is possibility is limited by our current paradigm.
Sure.
Okay. So I have I would say the design of divine intervention that I have an early failure in my career. I moved from from Malaysia to Hong Kong, and I went through an incredible transition because you go from a Penang and you come to Hong Kong, where space is so limited. I mean, I just went through shock, right? And then the third thing is that when I moved from manufacturing at the peak of my career, 13 years after doing a lot of transformation and so forth, and coming to sales and marketing, those guys look at me and go like, "So, who are you?" And tell me right now, right here, what's your value proposition? Do they care that I did 2 organizational transformations? Do they care that I set up a 10,000 square feet Intel University to transform manufacturing operators? They don't.
Yeah.
Right. And
so Chin Teik, tell me, based on those examples you just shared with us, if you were to get into your helicopter, now hindsight being a good thing, and you can do the reflection as you talked about before, what's the one thing that was probably common for you throughout all those different transitions that you could share with the listeners that helped you get through it? What was the one big thing that would actually help you get through it all?
I think one is as grit is defined. I think as you're getting through the tough times, having a long-term objective in front of you will help you get through that. I mean, grit is defined as going through all those tough times and persevering, but with a very clear long-term objective. I think that's one of it that's very important. I think number 2 is that the failure experience I had, my mentor gave me this very simple statement. He said, "Yeah, you're pissed. Yeah, you're angry. Yeah, you're going through all that emotion, right?" He basically said, "You have 2 choices." And I use these 2 choices very often with all my staff, right? It's you have 2 choices. You fight or you flight.
Sure.
All right. And I chose to fight. And I think fighting is one of those nature I had built up during my pre-teen years and my teen years through all the scouting and through all the tough times, right? So having that build of that grit and hardiness, I think helps one go through those emotional transition much better than someone who's never been exposed to tough times.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant sharing. Hey, listeners, I'm here with Chin Teik. He's sharing some beautiful wisdom and insights here with us in relation to leadership is changing. Chin Teik, if there was one thing you could change in business as a leader today, what would it be?
Embed a strong organization culture.
Okay.
With clear purpose, aligning it, matching it, so that you can execute to your constancy of purpose.
Yep.
And to ensure that one of the big things for me is justice, organizational justice, and to ensure that that culture is basically honoring diversity, honoring women, right?
Nice.
Because Dennis, people leave bad culture. People leave weak managers. And in my experience, especially with the family businesses, there's an overemphasis on values and not enough on culture and corporate, right?
Yeah.
So the term I came up with is called constancy of purpose. I stole that from the late Edward Deming, the father of total quality management. The concept of purpose to me is a framework. It's a one-page framework that basically have a few elements. The first element at the bottom, which is foundation, is why do you exist? The core purpose, right? And why do you exist? And what are your values and culture that makes you who you are, and basically differentiates you from other companies, from other organizations, right?
And maybe other people as well.
And maybe other people as well. And the top of it is basically where you're going.
Yes.
Right? Your vision, your direction, right? And then underneath that is basically what are your 3 prioritized strategies to achieve your vision? How do you measure it? And most importantly is what are your prioritized focus areas? And I love the number 3 because the brains can remember 4 things. And I'm amazed at KPIs that's like 25 to 35 items.
Crazy.
Right? So the concept of purpose is very important in the sense that we've got to start building culture, and culture is what I call language and management practices that basically allows us to find the right people for the right bus, execute the greatness, right? But at the same time, being seen as a company that basically has organizational justice. that's been fair to people, that's been fair to diversity, and really, really living your brand.
Yep.
So to me, it's one thing I can change is start building strong cultures.
Yeah, I get it. I hear what you're saying, and I think that's great. And the thing that you also shared before was about purpose. Do you think that a lot of leaders today understand their purpose? And I'll give you a little bit of context here, because I think a lot of leaders that I see who are in organizations, their whole identity is around their job title or the organization they've been working for, but it's got nothing to do with their purpose.
Yes.
Do you think a lot of leaders are weak or missing or lacking in their purpose in life?
Absolutely. I mean, I was very blessed because one of my ex-leader, big in development in APAC, sales and marketing, Dave Strictly, he was big in all that. So he brought me to a lot of the development. And he came with me. And we both went to a 7 Habits of Highly Effective People workshop in 1993, where I wrote my core purpose statement.
Sure.
And where I wrote my career vision statement. And I've been living that core purpose statement of making immediate impact on people I care about and I work with. And my career vision, I've spent from 1993 to 2006 to get to what I'm doing right now, Dennis. And that long-term vision, I think, allows you to go through all that pain, all that journey of change and disruption by keeping an eye on there and keep moving, right? But I think the key is to have a direction and to have a purpose. And I run a workshop called Identity Before Destiny for executives as well as for the next generation of 15-year-olds. And I can tell you right now, Dennis, when I run that workshop for executives, 90% of them don't know their purpose in life. And what I like to do with these people is I say, Dennis, introduce yourself. And everyone will tell me their name, their job title,
yes,
the department they're in, how long they've worked. And I simply ask them one question. I say, Dennis, your identity is linked to your job title.
Nice.
What happens to you when you retire? Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Good questions.
So I believe that number one is, again, back to culture. If we can have individuals who know their why, their how, and their what, and the company's consistency of purpose, and we can start matching it, Dennis, we're going to be in a sweet spot because we're not going to have the right people on the right bus.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's why it's important that when you're in a job interview, it's not only you being interviewed for the job, it's you actually should be interviewing the company and the leader about the role. Because if your areas, your purpose and those, what you've just shared, and it doesn't match and it doesn't marry up, even though the job might be good dollar value, might be exciting, be careful in what you're actually signing up for, because it may not be a marriage in heaven, if I can put it that way, right?
And one of the things I've started to shift my clients to do, which as a sidebar, that's what actually I taught my son when he was looking for a job. I know he's a lawyer, IP lawyer. And what I told him was this. I said, son, when you go for interviews, I want you to ask them, sir, what's the purpose of your company? And what's the vision of your company? What's the values of the company? Now, can you imagine law firms, Dennis? Law firms don't do that. Right? And so one of the things I'm doing now with many of my clients is to say, when you're interviewing potential candidates, right? Ask them,
sure,
Dennis, before we go any further, instead of the usual, tell me about yourself, I want you to tell me, why do you think you exist? What's your core purpose in life, Dennis? And what are your how are you going to contribute to the company? So I'm talking about brand promise, right? And what are your key accomplishments?
Yep.
Right. And where you're going? Where you're going with the career? Where you're going with the career vision, right? And then I will tell you as a company, this is my why, this is my where, this is my why, how, and my what, and we can start matching it. So I think the second part is, if one thing I can change in business would be two now, is we're going to start getting the right people at the starting point. Yep. Because hiring right is the most important of all the strategies of talent management. If you hire wrong, that is,
There's can be a lot of heartache. There's a lot of problems that could be very expensive, but it's just the whole, as you say, the culture would just be wrong, and that's hard. And so this was actually a great segue into the next question, which is, what about, I mean, maybe you've alluded on to this already, is, just talking about your son and job interview and things like that, but how has employee expectations of leaders changed?
The funny thing is, it has not changed, Dennis. I think the leaders and managers missed the boat. If we start replacing employees with the term people,
yep,
people's need has never changed. I need to be acknowledged. I need to be listened to. I need to be appreciated, right? I need to be given a meaningful job. I need to be given something that I find relevance in. I need to have a job that is leveraging my strengths. I call it a 70-25. If 70% of the time you are not being used in terms of your strength, you are going to be very miserable.
Sure.
But many people, Dennis, again, just as they don't know the core purpose, many people don't know their strengths.
No.
And what I teach people is once you know your strength, shout it out. Tell your boss to use that strength. But instead, most people use your weakness. So imagine how miserable, again, and painful that is.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
Right. And then I want to highlight one thing, right? Hawthorne effect or Hawthorne studies, which is the study of whether light impacts employee productivity, was studied, I think, in 1924, then 1933. It highlights the end of the day, it's not the work environment, it's not the money. End of the day, it's the management style. It's the attention you pay to your employees that impacts their productivity and their quality.
Yeah.
And here's a story I have, right? Well, but in my manufacturing days, we implemented a breakthrough system where I designed whereby every operator in front of the machine has a P and Q chart, for productivity and quality chart.
Yes.
We give them the target by hour, and their job is to monitor themselves against that hour. So in the first hour, if I'm supposed to make 4 widgets, if I made 4 widgets, I put a score, right? And the supervisor's job is very simple. Walk around, and there are like 20 operators in a row, and all the supervisors start to do is to only positively give feedback to those who've done well and make it really loud.
Awesome.
Because the next person who hears it wants that same positive feedback, so they work really hard to get their attention.
Beautiful. That's great. That's a great way of doing it, isn't it? Yes. And but interesting how you're saying that the employees' expectations actually haven't changed. Maybe it's the leaders and managers not actually succeeding or stepping up and failing. That they, and I even look at millennials, right? Millennials don't leave because, as you said before, the organisation, it's the leader and maybe the culture. But I also know that they're looking for strong leaders to lead them. They're looking for leaders to actually mentor them, and people aren't stepping up to do that as well. So I think it's really, really important. So what makes a leader successful in this fast-paced, ever-changing world?
Growth mindset.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it?
First is a growth mindset. To be able to himself or herself having gone through personal experiences, learning also from how he or she has grown up. Like, for example, I have one instance of a person I'm working with, and her whole life is based on her intelligence, IQ test, how clever I am, right? And so once you get to that mindset, now you're kind of stuck, right? So we need leaders who are, you said in the beginning of the intro, agile, right? They have to be agile, they have to be able to move, they have to be able to pivot, but you cannot pivot if you don't know who you are.
Right.
So we need growth mindset. I believe the second thing is leaders who are successful basically do not create and followers, they create leaders. I believe good leaders multiply, they have a multiply effect. They're basically able to transfer, right? Because today in this disruptive world, you cannot do the old traditional way where one guy is pushing the rock.
Yeah.
Right? You got to have people around you who are using the different strengths. You're basically multiplying the different strengths, complementing it, and having a multiply effect that then gets you the result in the least painful way, but with speed, time to market.
Yeah.
Right? I believe that leaders need to basically be able to say this following mantra that I came up with. Number one is that when I have people working for me, I call it the 4P, Dennis, which is I had to say to myself and say, it is such a privilege for me to be given people to steward. It's very personal because where everything I say, everything I don't say, everything I do, I don't do, I will hurt them. And when I hurt them, they bring it back home.
Yeah.
It's very personalized because no one self fits all. So I have to learn to be a situational leader. And lastly, it's very painful.
Right.
Because leadership is not, it's not a bed of roses. I mean, there are good times and there are bad times. And you have to step up and do the right thing. And doing the right thing is really, really hard.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And Chin Teik, when we're talking about that and talking about the fast-paced and changing world, if I was to get your crystal ball out and start thinking about the future and things like that, where do you see leadership going in the next 5 years?
Number one is back to basics. I still believe that a lot of fundamentals are missing, Dennis. I believe that the big organization, have done injustice to the people we promoted. We're promoting the wrong people. We're not getting the right people into play. We're not helping them. We're not developing them. And so a lot of employees are being impacted because of the wrong people in those roles.
Yes. Yeah, huge. Back to the basics. Yep.
You get back to basics. I think the second thing I talked about much earlier on was lead change and manage transition. They have to start leading change and management transition. And the way I do that is called the 5R and the 5C. So you notice I like the 4P, the 5R, 5C. So there's a 5R, which is a communicate change. We don't do a decent job of communicating change.
Yep.
And the 5R basically stands for the fact of how we move people's emotion, because the people don't fear change, Dennis. People fear the unknown that comes with the change. And so I designed the 5R so that people can understand the change. They may not like it, but they can understand the change. So the 5R stands for the reason, the results,
yep,
how your role will change. Most people will be worried about the third one, the role, meaning, will I have my job?
Yes,
so
correct.
You got to upfront talk about that, right? Don't hide it, right? The fourth one is roadmap. People like to know, how long is this going to last? How much pain do I have to endure, right? And the last is, how will you help me? Resources. So reason, results, role, roadmap, and resources.
Yes.
Then the 5C is basically what blocks us from shifting.
Yep.
Okay, and the first 3C is the most important, which is, I find the challenge too much. I cannot deal with it. So I'm back to fixed mindset versus growth mindset. I've lost people I like. I've lost my connection. I've lost my role. I lost my identity, right? Now the third one is basically, I feel out of control.
Correct, yeah.
So those 3Cs block us from shifting to new beginning.
Yeah, I'm in suspense now for the two remaining Cs.
So once you shift the 2Cs, then the fourth C is basically commitment. So if I can unblock your first 3Cs, your commitment now then is high.
Yes.
And then the last C is capability. So now that your commitment is high, now I can train you.
Wow. Now you're in a space where I can train you. Now I can help you move forward as well. Oh, awesome. The 5Rs and the 5Cs.
Yeah.
Very
we need
cool.
leaders to be equipped. And what I find when I work with a lot of people is everybody thinks it's very intuitive. Dennis, they think change is just very intuitive. They just look at you and say, oh, guys, come on, guys, get up and just get moving, guys. Right? Or I just retrenched 5 people that it's okay, suck it up and move on.
Yeah. It's a bit like when we were kids playing rugby. I don't know if you follow rugby at all, but we're playing rugby, and at halftime, the coach and the fathers and mothers would get in there with us as kids, and they give us the little quarter of an orange, and we put it in. We could smile, and it looks like an orange in our mouth, and we have orange, and they'll say, "Come on, you can do it. You can get it. Just get on with it." And away you go. But they weren't always teaching us. They weren't always showing us, right? But the more important thing was that we were getting out there and giving it a go, which is really important for sure. Over years, we were committed, but over years, our capability grew as they grew, and they actually share things with us for sure. Yeah, that's great. Oh, awesome. Look, you've shared some really, really awesome insights today, and thanks very much for joining us on today's show. If our listeners are wanting to get hold of you, where should they go?
My LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn.
My LinkedIn profile or my website, which has my contact email.
Yep. What's your website?
www.chinteik.com.
Okay, good. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Chin Teik, hey, thank you very much for joining us on today's show. It's been a privilege having you here with us, so thank you. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and the unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Hey, listeners, look out for the episodes as they're being released. Download them, listen to them, put a review and a rating, and share them with your network. Now, if there's a question or some feedback you'd like to give me, or a question you want me to ask my guests, or if there's a question you want me to ask on the Ask Dennis episode, feel free to send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com. Once again, team, hey, if you haven't checked out already, go to Facebook and check out the Leadership is Changing Facebook group. Hey, listeners, awesome to have you here with us on the show today. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.